There's a number floating all over the internet that says teachers make 1,500 decisions a day in their classrooms. That's between 3 and 4 every minute for 6.5 hours straight. Wouldn't you like to put some of your classroom management decisions on autopilot so you could bring down this number a little bit? In this video, I'm going to share with you 9 ready-made responses that you can have waiting for you when simply reinforcing positive behavior just isn't pulling things together like you need it to. By the end of this video, you're going to feel like you have everything you need to be in control. I'm Dr. Brian Sitchie Parker, and I'm so honored that you're here checking into the My Teaching Coach channel on YouTube. I'm sending a huge thank you to all of you who have subscribed to become part of the community that we're building and for choosing to spend a few minutes of your day with all of us here. If you're not a part of our community yet, go ahead and click that subscribe button. It's free and you'll never miss an episode. This video is all about responding to inappropriate behaviors, and it fits into the 5 requirements of classroom management series. This is our last video in this series, and you can see the introductory video right here. You might be getting a little tired of hearing these, but let's run through these 5 requirements one more time so that you can see where we're putting our focus today. Number 1, maximize structure. 2, establish and teach rules. 3, actively engage students during instruction. 4, use a variety of strategies to respond to appropriate behaviors. And 5, use a variety of strategies to respond to inappropriate behaviors. I've referenced the ABC model of behavior a few times in this series, so you're probably already familiar with it. The antecedent is the trigger, or whatever starts the behavior in motion. In video number 3 of the series, I talked about this being the opportunity for the student or students to respond. Then comes the response or the behavior. It could be the behavior of the student responding to a question you posed, or it could be a behavior that the student started on their own because of an antecedent put in play by someone or something else. Then the consequence happens. I've mentioned before that the word consequence isn't a synonym for punishment, but rather it's whatever happens next in response to the behavior. So it could be that you respond with some reinforcement. It could be that you give the student some attention, or that you give them an item or let them engage in an activity. Maybe you help them meet some sensory need that they have. However, the consequence could be a punishment. The definition of a punishment is any consequence that has an effect of making the behavior weaker or less likely to occur in the future. In general, we think that punishments must be something that the student doesn't like, that are mean or embarrassing. No. None of the above. A punishment, by definition, is only determined by the effect that it has on the behavior. If it makes the behavior less likely to happen or weaker, it's a punishment. This is an important distinction because sometimes things that we as teachers might think are punishments are actually reinforcers. Think about using suspensions as punishments for skipping school. For a student who really doesn't want to be at school, is an out-of-school suspension really a punishment? No. The last thing I'll say here is that reinforcements need to be used much more than punishments. 5 times more, in fact. You need to use 5 positive interactions for every negative or neutral interaction in order to build up that positive classroom community that will support high student achievement and low teacher stress. So the next thing we're going to talk about is function-based intervention. In the last video, I told you that there are 4 categories of reinforcement: attention, item or activity, or sensory. These same categories exist when we're talking about interventions for inappropriate behavior as well. We can add or remove stimuli from one of these categories to make a behavior weaker or reduce the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. We have to think about which category of reinforcement is maintaining the inappropriate behavior and then put in place an intervention that messes up that cycle. Not every intervention maps perfectly into just one category of reinforcement, so it's not always an easy decision about which way to go. But once you try an intervention, then you'll be able to see what happens, and that will be data that can inform what happens next. As we discuss the strategies, I'll point out how the function plays a role in why you would choose that intervention. But the way to think about function of behavior is to always ask yourself this question. Is the student trying to get something or to avoid something? And what is that something? Is it attention, an item or activity, or some sensory need or feeling? So let's talk through the strategies in order of their severity as determined by me. The first one is a behavioral reminder. A behavioral reminder is just a brief, neutral prompt to help the student to remember and follow classroom behavioral expectations. This is an example of a punishment though, because it's something you're adding to make the behavior you're seeing go away. Try to offer the reminder as a statement of praise to a student who is showing the expected behavior first. This helps keep your ratios up and contributes to the overall positive atmosphere. If that didn't catch the attention of the person engaging in the inappropriate behavior, maybe you could ask the question to the class as a whole. Class, what is rule number 3? If that still didn't get the offending student's attention, you could speak directly to the student with the reminder, but keep engagement with the student who was misbehaving to a minimum. Say the student's name and restate the expectation. Chad, rule 3 is to stay engaged in your work. Don't engage if they want to argue back. At the same time, however, you do want to maintain a pleasant and helpful classroom community. So if the student does offer a valid reason for their off-task behavior, you can respond respectfully and help them resolve any problem they're having. Remember though, that any attention you give them could signal to them that this is the right moment to get their needs met, and it could start a new habit. So the second one is planned ignoring. If the function of the behavior is to get teacher attention, ignoring the behavior sets it up to disappear because it's not getting reinforcement. However, if the behavior is being reinforced by attention from other people, then this intervention will fail and could get worse. This makes me think about a teacher who gets sworn at by a student who is having a meltdown in class. If the student swears and there is pin drop silence and the class looks at you to see how you're going to react, and you hold yourself together and you count to 10 or 15 in your head with your lips pursed, and then you calmly repeat the instruction, or you ask the class to get back to work, you don't need to do anything more. Everyone knows that the line was crossed and that you are still in charge. However, if the other students in the class laugh, you have a much bigger problem on your hands because the reinforcement for the swearing is being handled by the other students, not by you. You're going to have to double check your ratios of positive to negative or neutral comments and maybe get some advice from a coach who can watch what's happening in your class. Often attention has nothing to do with the problem, and ignoring could actually end up just being teacher negligence. If a student's bad behavior is being caused by their inability to read, for example, that is causing a physical anxiety reaction in them, and ignoring them is never going to get them the reading supports that they need. The same goes for an item or activity. Ignoring a student whose pencil was stolen won't get their pencil back, and their behaviors will go on until they get their property returned. The next one is a diffusing technique. Diffusing techniques are any teacher actions taken to calm the student or otherwise diffuse a situation with the potential for confrontation or emotional escalation. So, an event happens that causes stress for a student. That same event might not cause stress for you or for any other student, but nonetheless, it's had an effect on that student. That stress amplifies feelings, which leads to behaviors to which others react. The reaction of others causes more stress, which causes the situation to spiral. The teacher can intervene at any point to help the student deal with those feelings, to stop their behaviors, or to shield them from reactions from others, or to alleviate the growing stresses. But keep in mind that the roles that attention from the teacher, from their peers, thoughts about what their parents will say or do, what administrators will say or do, and the items, activities, and the sensory systems in their own bodies are playing throughout the entire interaction. So be kind and be very thoughtful about how you interact and what's going on for that student. The next strategy is an academic adjustment. An academic adjustment is a change made to the student's academic tasks to improve behaviors. Such changes could include the amount of work assigned, how much support you're providing to the student during work, or how much time you're giving them to complete it. Remember, fair is not always equal. The difficulty of work often is a cause for inappropriate behavior for students. Even for students who can do the work, they might not have the stamina to do the amount of work you're requesting. Knowing your students and their academic limits can go a long way to keeping everyone in a calm space in your class. The next strategy is called an environmental adjustment. An environmental adjustment is a change made to some aspect of the student's environment to improve behaviors. While one doesn't need to be diagnosed with a neurodiversity to have sensory issues, this is one area of difficulty that I've seen a lot for my students with autism or ADHD. There are many environmental aspects of classrooms that don't affect the majority of people, but that do have a huge effect on a small number of students. Things such as temperature fluctuations, fluorescent lights that flicker or buzz, smells, or the high volume of voices of the other students or even the teacher can all be triggers for some students. Some students act out because they can't read the board very well, or others become overwhelmed with the number of students packed into your room. Making your classroom safe for all students, regardless of their levels of sensory sensitivity, helps everyone. The next strategy is a warning. A warning is a teacher's statement informing the student that continued misbehavior will be followed by a specific disciplinary consequence. The warning itself is considered punishment in this strictest sense because you've added something to make the behavior become weaker or to go away. You do not give a warning unless you already know what that next step will be. Also, you should already have an idea of why the student is engaging in these behaviors. In other words, what is the function of the behavior? Is it the student trying to get something or escape something? And what is that something? The next strategy is called a response cost. A response cost intervention is the taking away of privileges or other valued elements in your classroom, the cost, in response to student misbehavior. A response cost can be an effective response to misbehavior provided that the student actually values the privilege or element being taken away. Prior to implementing a response cost, you may want to create a series of privileges in your classroom that students find motivating and do not want to lose. In other words, if your classroom doesn't have anything interesting or fun enough that losing it would be a punishment, this isn't going to work. Because response cost is a punishment procedure, you should first ensure that appropriate, less intrusive efforts have been put in place before you use it. The next item is a strategy is a behavioral conference, which is a brief meeting between teacher and student to discuss the student's behavioral problems. While the structure and content of a behavioral conference will vary based on the circumstances, it will typically include some or all of these elements. A description of the problem behavior, some open-ended questions and student input. I'll tell you that one of the things that I did at this point that made a huge difference in my teaching career is that I would say, I noticed that this is happening. Could you tell me more about it? That's an open-ended question that leaves room for the students to offer more information from their perspective, which really is a great data gathering tool for the teacher to help understand what's happening. The next item is some collective problem solving and then putting together a plan if problem behavior continues. So this is a meeting that can be held really briefly in the hall in the moment. You just ask the student to step in the hall with you, or it could be before or after school. It could even escalate to happening with the student's parents or an administrator if needed. And finally, the last item on this list is a timeout from reinforcement. It's a brief removal of the student from the setting due to the behavior problems. So with this response to inappropriate behavior, it's especially important to understand what the function of the behavior is so that you know what reinforcement you're removing them from. If attention from peers is what's motivating inappropriate behaviors, that's what you're going to give them a timeout from. If playing on their phone is keeping them from paying attention in class, that's what you're going to give them the timeout from. The timeout would be removing them from the activity of playing on their phone. It's removal of whatever the reinforcement is for the inappropriate behavior. This term is sometimes used in place of the word seclusion, as in solitary confinement, which is something completely different and 100% is not allowed. I put this last on the list because we don't always have control of the things that are reinforcing to the student who's engaging in inappropriate behaviors. And it can get a little dramatic for teachers to try to gain control over the reinforcers that we don't have control over naturally. It's a big deal to gain control over a student's phone. It's a big deal to remove them from class if they don't want to go. If you've been teaching in the post-pandemic world or been in special education situations, you've probably experienced a room clear. They are not fun for anyone, but oftentimes that's what's required to get control over the reinforcers in a situation. And we want to avoid that whenever we can. With all of these strategies, I want to warn you about something, and that something is called an extinction burst. An extinction burst is when a behavior that a student was able to rely on to get some reinforcement no longer gets them the same reinforcement it used to. They have to increase the intensity of the behavior to try to get you to deliver the reinforcement they used to expect. If you resist, they will continue to escalate their behavior. This doesn't mean that your intervention is failing. It actually means that your intervention is working. But we don't know how far the student will go to get the reinforcement they were expecting. So make sure you let them know what they need to do to get the reinforcement they want from you in a positive way. This is why we always frame our rules by telling students what we want them to do, not what not to do. If we tell them how to get reinforcement, they can switch over to do that behavior and get their needs met. If they don't know what to do, they just might keep escalating the inappropriate behaviors until they become really dangerous. My goal as your teaching coach is to provide you with evidence-based information so that you will always be seen as competent and capable, and these strategies definitely give you all that you need in that department. My second goal for you is to be able to advocate for yourself as a professional, and you are well prepared to do that now too. As long as you remember to keep your ratio of positive interactions to negative and neutral interactions to 5-to-1 or higher, you are doing what you need to do to build a positive learning environment for your students. To go one step further, you could invite one of your peers or an administrator whom you trust into your room to collect data on your interactions. Or you could video record your teaching and score yourself. Make a tally mark for each time you provide some praise or other positive feedback to students in one column, and a tally mark in a different column for each time you make a negative or neutral comment. If you're not at 5-to-1, you know what you need to do. My third goal for you as your teaching coach is to spread justice. And this ratio provides a basis for teaching students what behaviors you expect and for building a positive classroom culture regardless of the home cultures of your students. Making inclusive expectations that create a community for all that requires all students to grow, and not just the students that are dissimilar to you, is an even greater step towards justice. Speaking of community, let's help this community grow by letting YouTube's algorithm know that you value this content. Hitting the like button and adding a comment tells YouTube that this information is worth sharing. I've been kind of reluctant to make comments in videos in the past too, scared that I might be judged or maybe that what I say might not be all that interesting. Don't worry about that. We're not judgy here. Answer this question for me in the comments. Was there anything in this video that was new for you? Or was there something that was just a good reminder? If you need any help, I offer one-on-one video calls and large group professional development sessions, both in person and remote. You can book a live meeting with me in just a few clicks by going to the Store tab at my website that is linked in the description. The topic of next week's video will be the What Works Clearinghouse. Until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, and get some rest.